The Last of the Von Erichs is the most recent episode that Viceland produced in their Dark Side of the Ring series, and if you know anything about the Von Erichs, it's one of the most tragic stories you will ever hear. We start the documentary with several big names in the industry talking about the Von Erichs and how big they were in the 80s. You have Jim Cornette, you have David Manning, or I think was a very close friend to the Von Erichs, almost part of the family. We see Kevin Von Erich, who is the last brother of the Von Erichs. They had 5 kids who were all brothers who were wrestling. And they actually had a kid before him who was also a boy. He was Jackie. He was the first one, but he died a long time ago. But there were 5 of them who wrestled. Kevin's the only one who is still alive, which is just horrible. When you think of a guy who had 5 brothers who now is an only child, and he is not even, extremely old. He's about in his 60s now. That is just, that's horrible. And he lost all of them at young ages. Just a horrible tragedy. It's unbelievable. It's like the family was cursed. But we see Kevin in Hawaii. He looks really happy. He's smashing coconuts open and drinking juice out of the coconuts. He is away from Texas, and I think he wants to be away from wrestling. So they talk about Fitz Von Erich and how he was the first one who got into wrestling, and he played a Nazi. Now, I know Fitz in this documentary is protected because there's a lot of horror stories you can tell about him, but I think Kevin in particular wanted to protect his father. So they're talking about the famous Von Erich claw that was originally started by Fritz, the father, and it was used by all his sons. Who can forget it? One of the most iconic finishers in all of wrestling. It's a move that is just synonymous with the Von Erichs. Now we're getting into the rise of their popularity during the World Class Championship Wrestling and how popular they were in Texas. They were extremely popular with women. The girls would just scream whenever they'd come out. And of the 3, they're really explaining the 3 brothers who were the top stars were Kevin, David, and the biggest star was Kerry. And Kerry was a superstar. He was obviously very attractive. The woman went nuts for him. He was the one who had the biggest mainstream appeal. Kerry Von Erich was a superstar. David Von Erich was the technician. He was the best worker of the 3. He was a great wrestler, and they even had him as a prospect to be a future NWA champion. And then you had Kevin, who was the best all-around athlete. He was very athletic in the ring, very good, moved very fast, and of the 3, they were heavily pushed. But we knew Kerry was obviously the one who had the most star appeal by far. And then they did have 2 younger brothers who would also get into wrestling, and unfortunately have nowhere near as much success. They'll be featured more later, I believe, but you had Mike, and then you had Chris, and Chris had a physical condition that really hurt his career. But as of right now, they're still happiness, they're having a lot of success, they're huge stars, and unfortunately we get to David's death. And David, as I said before, was a great worker. He was penned to be a future champ. However, he passes away in Japan in his hotel room. Most people thought at the time it was a drug overdose. It wasn't. What he had was a condition in which his intestines had bursted, and what I believe happened was it caused heart failure. It got into his bloodstream, and it caused heart failure, and he died as he was trying to call an ambulance for himself. But there was many conspiracies that could have been drugs that caused it. We don't know exactly, but what we do know is someone who was close to David in Japan was the Bruiser Brody, who of course was the previous episode for Dark Side of the Ring. And he was very emotional, talking about David's death on the phone to Kevin. And David's death really crushes Kevin because they were really close. And he admits that was still the one that hurt him the most because that was the first one. They had Jackie, which they haven't talked about yet. But Jackie was many years ago when Kevin was a child. He was really close to David. So when David dies, it devastates him. And it's still to this day, whenever he hears a phone call, he gets nervous. It was really horrible. And you also have Dave Meltzer, who's on here, and he even tells a story when he was living in Texas at the time. That in the mall, there were women crying, young girls, teenage girls crying. The boys had to comfort them. It was really horrible. And as they're talking about David, he wasn't actually the first one to die. Jackie was the first one to die, and this happened in the 50s when they were all young. They had a host trailer in which they could move during the territories because of wrestling with Fritz. And what happened was he had kids, and as Jackie, he was 6 years old, he was coming home from school, he was electrocuted. He was electrocuted near the trailer, and it was snowing, and he fell face down into the snow, and he drowned in the snow. That's just horrible, a 6-year-old child. And Fritz is so devastated. He's so angry. He's in shock. He goes and he punches through a car window, causes blood, could have bled to death. Just absolutely horrible. So it's like, that's 2 kids he's lost already. Jackie, then David. And he's married, of course, with a wife, and like 2 children are already gone. How could you even imagine? So the David's death really set it everything, it set it all off. It was really the first domino to fall, and all the deaths after David are all connected to his. It really was tragic. It was shocking at the time because for wrestling, it was really strange because he was such a big star and he was so young, and you can just see all of Texas was mourning. These kids, these Von Erich kids growing up, they were Texas's sons. So the whole state, it was like they were just crushed by this. They do the Parade of Champions in David's honor, and that is where, in Texas Stadium, since the old Cotton Bowl, that is where Kerry Von Erich defeated Ric Flair to win the NWA Championship. Huge event in '84. And I think this was for sure the biggest win of the career of Kerry Von Erich. So you can see the emotion of the Von Erichs as Kerry wins the title. However, things would go downhill again. What had happened is, because David's gone, they wanted someone to replace him, and they chose Mike Von Erich, who is the 4th oldest at the time, and 5th, actually, because if you count Jackie. And Mike is small. He is someone who does not look like a wrestler, and they keep bringing it up of how much he's not an athlete. He just doesn't look like it. You look at his body, he doesn't look like someone who belongs in a wrestling ring. That's it. And his matches are not good. Dave Meltzer is really admitting how painful it was to watch his matches, and he is someone who obviously is known for writing matches, so he's seen a lot of them. He's really saying, Mike just was not good. Jim Cornette's saying it, and this goes downhill for Mike Von Erich as he suffers a bad shoulder injury. He's wrestling Gino Hernandez, who, by the way, will be the next episode of Dark Side of the Ring. He suffers torn ligaments in his shoulders, and this would lead up to his death. So we see Kevin's 2 kids, briefly, once we all get back to Mike, we see his 2 kids who are training, Ross and Marshall, who are training to be wrestlers. And before Mike came in, they were talking about Lance Von Erich, who they brought in. He was horrible. Kerry and Kevin did not want him there, or they're adamantly against it. And the biggest thing was, he had a great look to him, but he was not a Von Erich, and the fans knew, and they turned on him, and they were really upset with him, and that was the beginning of the end of World Class. So going back to Mike, after the injury, he suffers toxic shock syndrome. He developed a staph infection, and it developed to toxic shock, and he is about to die. All his organs are shutting down. It looks like he's gone. The family's gathered in the hospital room, but then thankfully, out of nowhere, there's a miracle. Everything's functioned. His body temperature was at 100. It goes down, and he's able to get back and to make a recovery. And then he's even at a wrestling event, and they're doing a press conference, and he's talking about how he's going to come back. And it's extremely painful to watch because it looks like someone who just had a seizure is talking, and it's it's hard to watch. Unfortunately, Mike would get depressed more and more, and he would take his own life. He overdosed on medication pills, and that was how he died. He was the next Von Erich to go. And just to keep track, that means the father, Fritz, and the wife, Peggy, that's 3 sons they've lost now. They find Mike's body in the woods, and they even have Kevin talking on the documentary. He even has to take a 10-minute break. He's just so emotional. Next to go was Chris, and they bring Chris in, again, taking another spot of the Von Erichs, and Chris Von Erich has a much tougher start because he has a medical condition in which he has asthma, and the asthma medication he takes makes his bones very fragile, and he suffers injuries quickly, and he's small in the ring. He's smaller than Mike. He does not look like someone who's a wrestler, and he suffers a bad arm injury when he's working out. So Kevin talks in detail what happens to Chris. Chris is really depressed. He's sitting on the edge outside on the hill, and Kevin talks to him, brings him back in, and he realizes when they get back in the house, he tells his dad is Chris leaves suicide notes. He finds Chris's suicide note. He goes upstairs in his bedroom, and he finds Chris on the floor choking, and he goes and puts his hand behind his head. He finds a hole, and he realizes Chris shot himself in the head, and he passes away. So that would be the fourth death. You have Jackie, then you have David, then you have Mike, then you have Chris. Now we're getting to Kerry, and Kerry was obviously the big star. He goes to the WWF, and Vince McMahon completely ruined him. Kerry had an accident in the 80s. They don't really talk about it much, but I've heard about it. It was a motorcycle accident. He was riding his motorcycle, and he hit the back of a police car, and he wasn't necessarily an accident that would kill you, but it did bad damage to his ankle. It did so much damage to his ankle. David Manning even said it was like an alligator took a bite out of his ankle. His ankle's so badly damaged that they have to amputate it, and he loses his foot. And that was kept secret. And Kerry was very protective of it. He was really ashamed of it. And it's weird. If that happens like in 2019, it would actually help him because it would make him a sympathetic figure, and he'd almost be an advocate for people who've gone through amputees. And it came back to haunt him later in the WWF because he became very limited in the ring. He was just a star, and Vince McMahon takes away the Von Erich name. He can't be Kerry Von Erich. That's his biggest drawing power is Kerry Von Erich. He can't be that. Now he's just the Texas Tornado. So they're really explaining Kerry's death came from the accident. It was all the drugs he took. And he was just addicted to painkillers. It got really bad, and after he leaves the WWF, it gets even worse. Then he gets arrested, he goes to jail, he leaves, and he gets on probation. It was a quick sentence. He's on probation, he doesn't have to spend much time, but he violates that. Kerry he's destroyed by drugs. He has his life tied to drugs. Kevin even talks about wanting to go with him on Alaska and go to hunting. There's no drug dealers there, but Kerry's life is really bad, and on the same morning that he was scheduled to be indicted on drug charges in 93 is where he would take his life. It happens in Fritz. Kerry goes to Fritz's ranch, and Fritz was pouring cement. Tells him he loves him, and he takes a gun. It was a .44 caliber gun that Kerry bought Fritz for Father's Day. He goes into the woods, and there is when he commits suicide by shooting himself in the chest. Kevin talks about how he's defending his father, and he even says that his mother blamed his father for everything, which is probably true. It's probably right because he put so much pressure on them, and it's almost like one death led to the other death. All of them were like dominoes happening, and they split up at this time, and they would both later die. And Kevin tells the story of Fritz pointing a gun at him, threatening to shoot him. Kevin has to leave. Fritz would eventually die of brain cancer, and then they don't talk much about Peggy, the mother, but she would die too. So that's 7 family members that Kevin had to lose. And Kevin is talking about how his life goes downhill. He tries to get himself arrested. He tells a very emotional story in a Texas gun shop. He goes to a shop, he steals guns, and then the guys tell him he loves him, and his life just changes after that. So I guess looking back, it's just awful. So you had, Jack, first one to go. Then you had David. Then you had Mike. You had Chris next. And you had Kerry. Then you had both the parents die. They didn't really talk about when they died, but they both went too. So unbelievable. And it's at the end, you're just looking at Kevin. He is in Hawaii. He has dealt more tragedy than maybe anyone in history. 7 family member deaths. The saddest part comes from Jim Cornette, who just said the saddest line that Kevin told him. I once had 5 brothers. Now I'm not even a brother. But when you look at the end, you look at Kevin, has 2 kids who are into wrestling now. It ends up being a story with unbelievable tragedy, but showing someone who is able to get through it. So Kevin Von Erich was amazing here, and I have to that this is my favorite documentary that Vice has produced. This was excellent.